I can't do this anymore, Emma, David said, tossing clothes into his suitcase while I sat helplessly in my wheelchair. This isn't what I signed up for. I gripped the wheels of my chair, my knuckles turning white as I watched my husband of 8 years pack to leave me. Just 3 weeks after the accident that shattered my legs, he was walking out. David, please, I said, my voice trembling. The doctor said with physical therapy, I could recover in a year, maybe 2. We can get through this. He barely glanced at me as he zipped up his bag. 2 years? I'm not putting my life on hold while you learn to walk again. I need someone whole, someone who can keep up with me. My name is Emma Chen, and at 32, I watched my marriage crumble in the wake of a devastating car accident. One moment I was driving home from my teaching job. The next I was waking up in the hospital with multiple fractures in both legs. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. David acted like I'd died anyway. You know what the worst part is? He continued, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. You probably won't even be able to paint anymore. That little hobby of yours that took up so much time, guess that's over now too. His words cut deeper than he knew. Art wasn't just a hobby, it was my passion, my escape, the one thing that was truly mine. I'd been teaching art at the local high school and spending every free moment in my home studio, dreaming of someday having my own gallery. Now he was using it as another weapon against me. I can still paint, I said firmly, though doubt crept into my voice. I can adapt, find new ways. Sure you can, he sneered, grabbing his suitcase. Keep telling yourself that. But I'm not sticking around to watch you try and fail. You're damaged goods now, Emma, and I deserve better. He walked out without looking back, leaving me alone in our bedroom, our home of 5 years, surrounded by the life we built together. A life that apparently meant nothing the moment I became an inconvenience. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there in my wheelchair, staring at the door, waiting for him to come back, to say it was all a mistake. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. David had always been about appearances, about having the perfect life, the perfect wife. A woman in a wheelchair didn't fit that image. The next few days were a blur of pain, both physical and emotional. My best friend Sarah moved in temporarily to help me adjust. But even her constant support couldn't ease the betrayal that ate at me. David hadn't just left me, he'd abandoned me at my lowest point, making sure to crush whatever self-worth I had left on his way out. He's garbage, Sarah said one evening as she helped me get ready for bed. You know that, right? What kind of person leaves their spouse after an accident? I nodded, but the words still echoed in my head. Damaged goods. Was that all I was now? Would anyone ever see me as whole again? The physical therapy sessions were grueling. Every movement sent shots of pain through my legs, and progress was agonizingly slow. There were days I wanted to give up, days when David's words seemed prophetic, but something inside me refused to break. One afternoon, about a month after David left, Sarah wheeled me into my studio. The room was exactly as I'd left it the day of the accident. Half-finished paintings on easels, brushes cleaned and waiting, the afternoon light streaming through the windows just right. You said you wanted to paint, she said, positioning my wheelchair in front of a blank canvas. So paint. I stared at the white expanse before me, my hands trembling slightly. What if he was right? What if I can't do it anymore? Sarah squeezed my shoulder. Then you'll find a new way, but you won't know until you try. That first attempt was messy, frustrating, and nothing like my usual work. But as the brush moved across the canvas, something shifted inside me. The pain, the anger, the betrayal. It all flowed out through my hands, creating something raw and real. I painted for hours until my arms ached and tears streaked my face. The result wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense, but it was powerful. It was honest. It was the beginning of something new. Days turned into weeks, and I developed a routine. Physical therapy in the mornings, painting in the afternoons. I learned to adapt my technique, to work from my wheelchair, to use my limitations as inspiration rather than obstacles. The paintings changed too. They became bolder, more abstract, filled with emotion that I couldn't express in words. Sarah watched my progress with growing excitement. These are incredible, Em, she said one day, studying a particularly intense piece. They're different from your old work, but I don't know, they're more. I wheeled closer to look at the painting, a swirl of dark blues and violent reds, pain and hope intertwined. They're more honest, I said quietly. Before, I was painting what I thought people wanted to see. Now I'm painting what I need to say. 3 months after David left, divorce papers arrived in the mail. He'd already moved in with someone else, a yoga instructor named Crystal who taught at his gym. The news should have devastated me, but instead, I felt strangely calm. I signed the papers without hesitation, then went straight to my studio and painted until sunrise. The physical therapy was starting to show results. I could stand for short periods, though walking was still a distant goal. But my upper body had gotten stronger, and I'd learned to navigate my wheelchair with increasing confidence. My world was small, but I was beginning to fill it with new possibilities. One day, Sarah burst into my studio waving her phone. "You need to see this," she said, practically bouncing with excitement. "Remember Marcus, the gallery owner I introduced you to at that Christmas party last year?" I nodded, vaguely recalling a warm, enthusiastic man with kind eyes who'd seemed genuinely interested in my work. "Well, he's opening a new contemporary gallery downtown, and he's looking for fresh talent. I sent him photos of your recent work, and she thrust the phone at me. "Read it." The email on the screen made my heart stop. "Sarah, these pieces are extraordinary. The raw emotion, the technical skill despite obvious challenges, it's exactly what I'm looking for. Would your friend consider showing her work in our opening exhibition? I'd love to meet with her to discuss details." I stared at the words, hardly daring to believe them. "But these aren't like my old work. They're not pretty or conventional. They're real," Sarah finished. "They're powerful, and they deserve to be seen." The meeting with Marcus was set for the following week. As Sarah helped me get ready that morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman staring back at me wasn't damaged goods. She was a survivor, an artist, someone who had found her voice in the darkness. Marcus arrived at my home studio right on time, his energy filling the room immediately. He moved from painting to painting, studying each one intensely, occasionally making small sounds of appreciation. "These are remarkable," he said finally, turning to face me. "The evolution from your earlier work is stunning. There's a depth here, a rawness that speaks to the human experience in a way that's both universal and deeply personal." I felt tears threatening but held them back. "They're different from what I used to do." "They're better," he said firmly. "They're truth on canvas. And I want to share that truth with the world." We spent the next hour discussing details, dates, pricing, promotion. Marcus wanted to feature my work prominently in the gallery's opening exhibition, giving me an entire wall to tell my story through art. As he was leaving, he paused in the doorway. "You know, Mrs. Chen, sometimes the most beautiful art comes from our deepest wounds. What happened to you was terrible, but what you've created from it, that's nothing short of magnificent." After he left, I sat in my studio for a long time, looking at my paintings with new eyes. Each one represented a step in my journey, from brokenness to strength, from abandonment to independence. David had thought he was leaving damaged goods behind, but instead, he'd unknowingly set me free to become something more. The next few months were a whirlwind of preparation. I painted with renewed purpose, creating new pieces specifically for the exhibition. My physical therapy continued to show progress. I could now walk short distances with a walker, though I still relied on the wheelchair most of the time. Sarah helped me document everything, taking photos and videos of my process. "People need to see this," she insisted. "They need to understand the story behind the art." One evening, as we were photographing my latest piece, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know they'll probably find out about the exhibition, right? David, the art world here isn't that big." I paused, brush hovering over the canvas. The thought had crossed my mind, but surprisingly, it didn't bother me anymore. "Let him," I said, adding another stroke of deep purple to the painting. "I'm not hiding anymore." The night of the gallery opening arrived sooner than I expected. As Sarah helped me get ready, I caught my reflection in the mirror, a far cry from the broken woman David had left behind. My hair was styled elegantly, my black dress fitting perfectly, and my wheelchair had been customized with sleek gold accents to match the gallery's aesthetic. "You look incredible," Sarah said, adjusting my necklace, "like a real artist." I smiled, touching the pendant that rested against my collarbone. "I am a real artist. It just took losing everything to find that out." The gallery was already buzzing with people when we arrived. Marcus had transformed the space into something magical. Soft lighting, strategic spotlights on each piece, and my work commanding the main wall exactly as promised. Seeing my paintings displayed so professionally made my heart race. Mrs. Chen, Marcus greeted me warmly, champagne flute in hand. The response has been extraordinary. 3 pieces sold in the first hour, and there's quite a buzz about your series. I wheeled closer to the main wall, taking in how different my paintings looked in this setting. The largest piece, titled Aftermath, dominated the center, a swirling vortex of dark blues and violent reds that I painted the day David's divorce papers arrived. Beside it, smaller works told the story of my recovery, each one a step in my journey from darkness to light. People gathered around me, asking questions about my technique, my inspiration, the emotions behind each piece. I found myself opening up, sharing parts of my story I thought I'd never tell. The accident, David's abandonment, the long road to recovery. It all flowed naturally into conversations about art and resilience. Your work is incredibly moving, an elderly woman said, wiping tears from her eyes as she studied one of my paintings. You can feel the pain, but also the triumph. It's beautiful. I was about to respond when Sarah's hand suddenly gripped my shoulder. She whispered, her voice tense. He's here. My heart stopped. I didn't need to ask who she meant. Slowly, I turned my wheelchair toward the gallery entrance, and there he was, David, looking exactly as I remembered him, with a young woman clutching his arm who must have been Crystal. He hadn't noticed me yet, too busy making a show of examining the artwork with an exaggerated air of sophistication. Crystal giggled at everything he said, her high-pitched laugh carrying across the gallery. They moved from piece to piece, getting closer to my wall. We can have security remove them, Marcus offered quietly, appearing at my side. I shook my head. No, let them come. I watched as David approached my display, his eyes scanning the paintings with growing interest. Then his gaze fell on the placard beside Aftermath. Emma Chen, featured artist, and his whole body went rigid. The moment he saw me, his face went through a series of emotions, shock, disbelief, and finally, a forced attempt at his old smug smile. Crystal looked between us, confusion evident on her face. Emma, he said, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone. What a surprise. I didn't expect to find you here. I wheeled forward slightly, making sure he could see me clearly in my elegant dress and perfectly styled hair. Why not? This is my exhibition after all. His eyes darted to the paintings, then back to me. Your exhibition? These are your works. Every single one, I replied calmly. Turns out I didn't need to walk to create art. I just needed to be free of people who couldn't see my worth. Crystal tugged at his sleeve. David, who is this? His ex-wife. I answered before he could speak. The one he left because she was damaged goods after a car accident. I gestured to the paintings around us. Though I suppose I should thank him. Without his cruelty, I might never have found my true voice as an artist. People had started gathering around us, drawn by the tension in the air. David shifted uncomfortably, his confident facade cracking. These pieces have been quite successful, Marcus chimed in smoothly, appearing beside me. The large centerpiece just sold for $75,000. Mrs. Chen's raw talent and unique perspective have made quite an impression on our collectors. David's face paled. The amount was more than he made in 6 months at his accounting job. Crystal's eyes widened, and she took a small step away from him. I always supported your art, David stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. I couldn't help but laugh. No, David. You tolerated it as a hobby when it suited you, then used it against me when you thought I was broken. But look around, every piece here was painted from my wheelchair after you left. They're worth more than you ever thought I was. The crowd had grown larger, and I could hear whispers as people pieced together the story. David's face had turned an interesting shade of red. Well, he said stiffly, I'm glad you found something to keep you busy. Come on, Crystal, let's. Actually, Crystal interrupted, dropping his arm. I think I'm going to look around some more. These paintings are incredible. She turned to me, her expression sincere. You're incredible. I had no idea. She glanced at David with new eyes, then walked away without another word. David stood there, abandoned in the middle of my triumph, looking small and pathetic. The man who had once seemed so powerful, who had shattered my world with his rejection, now couldn't even meet my eyes. Enjoy the exhibition, David, I said softly. The next piece I paint might be about forgiveness, but I'm not quite there yet. He turned and practically fled the gallery, leaving a wake of whispers and knowing looks behind him. Sarah squeezed my shoulder, and I could feel her grinning. That, she said, was better than any revenge I could have planned. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and sales. By the end of the night, most of my pieces had sold, and Marcus was already talking about a solo exhibition in the spring. Later, as Sarah helped me into the car, she asked, "How do you feel?" I thought about David's face when he realized what he'd walked away from, about Crystal's quiet departure, about the success that had come from embracing my truth rather than hiding my pain. "I feel whole," I said simply, "more whole than I ever did when I was trying to be the perfect wife he wanted." 6 months later, I opened my own studio in a renovated warehouse space. It was fully accessible, with adjustable high easels and plenty of room to maneuver my wheelchair, which I still use sometimes, even though I could walk short distances with a cane. I started teaching art classes to people with disabilities, showing them that creativity doesn't depend on physical perfection. Every time I helped someone find their voice through art, I thought about how far I'd come from that day David walked out. My paintings continued to sell, each one reaching deeper into the truth of human experience. The accident that David thought would end my art career had actually launched it, turning my pain into something beautiful and profound. One afternoon, as I was setting up for a class, an envelope arrived from Crystal. Inside was a check for a significant amount and a note. "I left David 3 months ago. Your story and your art helped me see that I deserve better than someone who measures people's worth by their perceived perfections. I'd like to commission a piece about finding the courage to walk away. You seem to know something about that." I smiled, wheeling over to a blank canvas. Sometimes the best art comes from our deepest wounds, but it's what we create from those wounds that defines us. David had walked out thinking he was leaving behind something broken, but instead he had unknowingly set free something extraordinary. As I picked up my brush, I thought about how life has a way of coming full circle. The accident that seemed to break me had actually rebuilt me, stronger and more authentic than before. And now, surrounded by my art and students, I was exactly where I was meant to be, not despite my struggles, but because of them. "Ready for your next class?" Sarah asked, poking her head into the studio. She had recently quit her job to help me manage the growing business. I looked around at the space we created, the paintings on the walls, the eager students arriving, the dream that had emerged from my darkest moment. "More than ready," I replied, and I meant it in every possible way. The woman David had abandoned as damaged goods had transformed into someone far more valuable, not just an artist, but a testament to the beauty that can emerge from brokenness. And that, more than any revenge or vindication, was the greatest masterpiece of all.